everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. We are now going to start the unit on the Civil War. Alright, so the whole first half of American history really leads up to this point. There is no more defining era, I guess you would call it, in the history of the United States than the Civil War. America was fighting against itself leading up to the Civil War. The Civil War is an absolute travesty. Ridiculous amounts of people die. An entire generation of young men get killed. And then coming out of the Civil War, America really has to change the direction that they're going in and does so relatively fundamentally. The Civil War is a pivotal turning point in the history of the United States, and it is really important that we understand what caused it, what happens, and what we learn from it. So that's what this unit's going to be on, is on the Civil War itself. All right? A lot of really interesting and cool stuff to talk about. It is absolutely brutal. We're going to today kind of set the foundation for what is getting ready to happen in this absolute ridiculous thing that is the Civil War. All right, so let me make myself smaller here. All right, so put myself up here in the corner. So we are going to be talking about the Civil War. Obviously, it literally says Civil War. I've already said it like 5 times. It is really, really, really interesting to me, and I do believe it's also going to be to you. It's not as simple as people make it out to be, while simultaneously being extremely simple. All right, so I'm going to try to be able to show you both sides of it, and when you are done with this, you should have a complete and total understanding not only of the Civil War and what actually transpired, but why it happened going through the rest of your life. Because let's be honest, this is probably the only time in your entire life that somebody is going to sit down and teach you and explain to you what happened to the Civil War. Yet, for the rest of your life, as you've seen it since it happened in 1861 when this started, for the rest of your life, people are going to argue about concepts that happened in the Civil War. Heritage versus hate, slavery versus the great evils in the world, the Confederate flag, how can it be offensive to you, and to me it means mudding and grits and bojangles and just southern stuff. Like, how do those arguments take place in society? Well, we're going to go through in detail and explain all of that here. So this, of all the stuff that you're going to learn about why this happens, is probably one of the more important aspects of the things that you will take away from high school history class for the rest of your life. So I take that understanding very seriously as I teach this, to make sure you understand from all perspectives what happened, why it happened, and how to prevent the atrocities from happening again. All right, so let's lay some foundation here for the Civil War. Let's start with, what's a Civil War? All right, so a Civil War is when a country goes to war with itself. Everybody's had a Civil War. This is almost every country has Civil War at some point where they fight each other. In America, ours is so brutal, and especially since we're in America, when people say the Civil War, they immediately think the American Civil War with people in blue coats and gray coats fighting each other. That is our Civil War. Most other countries have had a Civil War at some point. So it's not just an old-timey war of muskets. It just means when a country declares war on itself. And we're even going to talk about how that is controversial. Just the word Civil War. Just the term Civil War is controversial. And we're going to talk about that today as well. All right. So this is really, really important to understand. Why is the Civil War so important? Well, not only the fact does it fundamentally change America, all right, after the Civil War in a variety of ways, it's the amount of people who died in the Civil War. It's absolutely catastrophic, the amount of people who are going to die in the Civil War. Like, look here, 620,000 Americans died. We're also going to talk about why is that a super neat round number. There's a very good reason for that, and we will talk about that. 620,000 Americans died in the Civil War. That's more than any other country. And if you take out World War II, it's more than every other country combined and then double. It literally is more than every other war America has ever fought combined. That is how many people died in the Civil War. Every other war we've ever fought combined is the Civil War. We've lost a little over 1 million soldiers in warfare in the history of our country. 60% of those Americans who have died in warfare died in the Civil War. Keep in mind, the population was much smaller then. So this number, all right, like World War II takes place a century later. This number is incomprehensible. It was an entire generation of young men that's going to get wiped out for a belief system on both sides. All right. So it stands to reason that a lot of things are going to change after the Civil War from the pure amount of casualties that take place. And these are deaths. These are people that died. We will talk about the differences in casualties and deaths. Casualties technically just mean people who can't continue to fight. All right. If you lose a foot and survive, you're still technically a casualty. All right. So I shouldn't really say American military casualties. Here's what I labeled it. This is American military deaths. These are people who died because the casualty rate is much higher. And there's a lot of people who got wounded who couldn't go back and fight. Astronomical. All right. It is just absolutely bonkers how many people died. Now, why did so many people die in the Civil War? Like World War II, they had like nukes and stuff, right? Well, we were the ones using nukes in World War II. We'll talk about that later. So the reason is America historically has been really good at two things. America's always like, we're the best in the world. Oh, we're fantastic. Well, there's two things that America just empirically is better than other countries, right? There's two things. Number one, historically speaking, we can make things faster than other countries. Now, you get into the 21st century, and you can make the argument with China mass producing things, and they do. But I'm talking about in warfare. When it is time to mass produce stuff, America can do it faster than anybody else. And the reason is we have tons of people, we have labor, we have land, we have resources. So America can mass produce things faster than anybody else. All right, that's the one thing that America is better at than anybody else historically. The second thing, killing people. We are really, really good at killing people. Like, we are the absolute best in the world at killing people. To the point that our kill-death ratio is astronomical. All right? In the war in Iraq, all right, and it's not even yes, it is. The Iraq-Afghanistan war. We lost 4,500 soldiers. This is the one that took place in 2003 up until mid-2010s. All right, 4,500 Americans died. In Iraq, America killed 1/10 of their adult male population. All right, America is really good at killing people. Like I guess that's something to be proud of. I mean, these are real human beings. America is very efficient at killing, incredibly efficient. So why do I keep saying that? Well, why do you think the Civil War has so many American deaths? Who are we fighting? Ourselves. The Civil War is Americans fighting Americans, and it is absolutely brutal, and we are slaughtering each other. All right. So the next thing we need to talk about is the capitals. So war used to be simple. It's almost like a big old game of capture the flag. If you can take over the other side's capital, you win the game. All right? That's how it's going to be in the Civil War. So when the South splits off here, right, and they move to the South, we have yet to talk about West Virginia. So it's a little confusing is why they always like, how do you make a map? Because West Virginia starts out, that's not a state. That's just part of Virginia. But West Virginia did not, the people that lived in West Virginia, the western part of Virginia, did not really support joining the Confederacy. So when Virginia leaves, West Virginia goes and is like, hey, wait a minute. we're gonna we cool if we break off and like go back this way because we don't want to have anything to do with you. And it was an amicable split. So West Virginia actually is going to be created during the Civil War because this part of Virginia didn't want to have anything to do with slavery or the Confederacy. So that's why West Virginia's always got like an asterisk during the Civil War, because West Virginia gets created in the middle of a Civil War. So there's not like a one map that encompasses all the Civil War depending on the time period. All right. So here's what I want to point out, and this is really important because we're going to talk about this a whole bunch in this unit. All right, because we're going to get the real nitty gritty of who's where and all this other stuff. So this is the South, the Confederate States of America. All right. At first, they thought about making the capital of the Confederate States of America their own country, to make it here in Montgomery, Alabama. All right. However, that lasted about a day before they're like, that would be a dumb idea. Because this is the 1860s. We're 1861 at this point. How do you travel from here to anywhere? Horse, wagon, train. Even if you're on a train that's going at a rocketing maybe 25 miles an hour, all right, at the time. Trying to get up here would take forever, all right? The North, the United States of America, is going to want to take over the South. So if they go marching into the South and you got your capital here, you can't really defend the South. Also should clarify, everything takes place at your capital. All right. Unlike today, you can train troops all over the country and then bring them in wherever you need to. That's a modern concept that's going to come out about 40 years after the Civil War. Where you train your troops is in the capital. Everything takes place in the capital. Like, this is your manufacturing center. This is where you train your troops. This is where your political leaders are. Everything is going to take place in the capital. All right. So if you have everything taking place down here, you can't defend Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. You can't defend any of this from an invading Northern army. So they decide, the South does, they're going to make their capital here, Richmond, Virginia. All right. Richmond, Virginia is going to be the capital of the Confederate States of America, which is directly next to the United States of America. Now, where is the capital of the United States of America? It's where it's always been. It's Washington, D.C. All right. Now, this might seem dumb to host these two capitals like 90 miles from each other, because that's all the distances is 90 miles. And it's like capture the flag. If you can take over the other side's capital, the war is over. You've captured basically their entire country. All right. So it seems dumb, like, and by today's standards in the 21st century, this would be, because you'd fly over, you got tanks, planes, all this other stuff. None of that exists. All the train tracks get destroyed immediately. The only way to get the 90 miles from Richmond to Washington, D.C., or from Washington, D.C., or to Richmond, is to walk, is to march. Today, 90 miles isn't very far. When you're having to walk it, it's a really, really far away. So, not surprisingly, all right, most of the battles in the Civil War, guess where they're going to take place at? Right here in between these two cities. Now, I want to talk about Maryland. All right. So I have a different map here. It's a little cleaner than this, but I do want to talk about Maryland. Maryland is right here. All right. So Maryland, let me show you a cleaner map here. So this here is Maryland. I'll bring up my little clicker thing here. Move that over. All right. So this here is Maryland. All right. Maryland is a slave state. Maryland probably, if they got to choose, would have chosen to be part of the Confederacy. That can't happen. Cannot happen in the Civil War, and here's why. All right. Right here, see, I don't know if you can see this little dot right here. This little dot right there. I don't know if you can see that on your screen. Hopefully you can. That is a city. That is Washington, D.C. That is the capital of the United States of America. Washington, D.C. is not in a state. Still isn't today. Washington, D.C. Is completely unique. And the reason that is because when they created the government, they didn't want the capital to be inside a state. Otherwise, that state can control that city and have way too much power in the federal government. So Washington, D.C. is not technically in a state. This is Virginia. This is Maryland. And this little dot right here, that's Washington, D.C. And they are just on the border of Virginia and Maryland. And They just do their own thing. They have a whole separate, unique set of laws, still do to present day. All right, so that neither state can tell a city inside their state what to do. Here's why this is incredibly important for Maryland in the Civil War. Maryland, they're a slave-owning state. Like, heck yeah, let's go to the Confederacy. So when Virginia here secedes and becomes part of the Confederacy, Maryland and all these yellow states, they're called border states. All right, all the border states are part of the United States. That they do not secede. Maryland wants to secede. Maryland's going to vote to leave. However, if Maryland secedes and Virginia's already seceded, guess who's right here in the middle and completely surrounded by the enemy? Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. loses. The Confederacy wins the war on day one. So Abraham Lincoln, who is the president, says, absolutely not. I refuse to allow Maryland to secede. So from the beginning, he puts Maryland under what's called martial law. It is the only president to ever done it. So, move my face out of the way. He is the only president ever to use martial law. All right. Literally says anyone attempting you'll be shot on sight. Let me explain. I'm jumping way ahead. Let me explain what martial law is. Martial law is the federal government rolling up into a state and saying, stay inside. It's like a quarantine. All right. Stay inside. Y'all can have your normal life, but there's no meetings. There's no nothing. If you try to have a meeting to vote on anything like secession, you're all going to be arrested. If you try to loot or burn or start a riot, you're going to be shot on sight. No questions asked. We're just opening fire. So if you try to get squirrely here, we're just going to open fire. And the military is going to enforce it. So Maryland gets put on lockdown. This is important to explain how unpopular Abraham Lincoln is. Abraham Lincoln, first off, when he got elected, half the country left. The people that are left in the United States are like, good riddance. Lincoln's like, no, we got to keep them. Then turns around and puts martial law, again, only president has ever implemented this, on a state of Maryland. Lincoln, to start with, is unpopular not only by the South, but they've left and become their own country. The United States of America is not a big fan of Lincoln. As this thing gets more out of hand, you would think people in the North yeah, Lincoln. It's not what happens. They blame him for all this drama that's getting ready to happen. Lincoln's one of the most unpopular presidents we've ever had while he was president. All right. So let's talk about some random things to keep in mind here. All right. This is the teams, more or less. This is the United States of America. It's called the Union and the Confederacy. This is the Confederate States of America. This is the Union. I need to clarify here. The United States of America was the United States of America before, during, and after the Civil War. They just in the 1800s referred to America as the Union. That was just, we don't really use that term very much anymore. You can still see it sometimes used in politics, like the State of the Union address that the president gives every year. That's the state of the United States of America. Like what type of condition is America in? So we do still sometimes use the word union. It's just kind of fallen out of style. But it was not like all of a sudden there was America and then there's two separate countries that showed up, the Union and the Confederacy. They fought and then go back to being the United States of America. That's not what happened. The United States of America existed the whole time. The Confederacy, the South broke off and became their own country. All right. The United States government didn't do anything. They didn't make any changes. All right. To clarify that about the United States government, let's talk about Lincoln real quick. All right. Other random things to keep in mind. So again, the South is the only one that created a new country. The North didn't. Lincoln, his only goal, and when I say it's his only goal, it is his only goal. Preserve the Union. Means keep it together. All right. Bring the South back in and keep America, America. Yeah, he's anti-slavery as a person, but that immediately gets put on the back burner. At the very end of the Civil War, all right, so many lessons from now, as everything's like smoldering on fire and everybody's like limping along and it's like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to finish this? Then it's just like all of a sudden he's like, I'm going to do it. And he writes the 13th Amendment and has it passed, which abolishes slavery. He is going to do that. That is what he is famous for today. This happened at the very, very end, years from where we're talking about right now. 5 years later. He is going to write it. It's barely going to pass, and we're going to talk about how crazy that is when we get there. And it is a a glorious change to the Constitution by today's standards, that it got done and how it was able to do it. But it was a last minute decision by Lincoln. All right. You need to understand that does not in any way play into his thought process throughout the Civil War. His idea of the Civil War is he needs to beat the South and bring them back in. He didn't give a flip about slavery. He's like, no. Yeah, sure, I'm against slavery. That's all. My main concern is preserving the Union. Bring them back in. If I can bring them back in and free some slaves and not the others, fine. If I can bring them back in and free all the slaves, great. If I can bring them back in and not free a single slave, great. He doesn't care about slavery. Step one, bring the South back in. That is his only goal. So, Abraham Lincoln is the president of the United States of America. The president of the Confederacy is this dude named Jefferson Davis. So, Jefferson Davis, right, gets more credit than I think he's due in American history. Here's why. Abraham Lincoln is the commander-in-chief of the United States military. What he says goes. And we're going to talk a lot about his military strategy and all that as we move through and we start talking about battles. So in history, Abraham Lincoln, extremely influential in the Civil War. I mean, pivotal, all right? So in history, they like to have a common person with them. They like to pick Jefferson Davis and say, hey, he's the president of the Confederacy and Abraham Lincoln is the president of the United States of America, so they're like equals. They're really not. The only reason Jefferson Davis is famous is because Abraham Lincoln is famous. His position as the president of the Confederate States of America doesn't really matter. Not to the extent Abraham Lincoln does. Because the Confederate States of America, their main goal was they didn't want the federal government telling them what they can or can't do. Like the expansion of slavery. All right. So this is the whole reason that they left, is they wanted to keep slaves and they wanted the federal government to not be able to tell a state what it can or can't do as far as expansion of slavery goes. So when the Confederate States of America are created, what they want to do is have a very weak federal government. So they basically create a government very similar to the Articles of Confederation, which gives all the power to the states. Jefferson Davis here, he is the president of the federal government in the Confederacy. A federal government that really has no power. He's more or less a cheerleader and it's like a motivational speaker. He just goes around and he begs people to help and what states need to contribute armies and all that. So there wasn't one big Confederate army. Every state had their own military. So this caused a lot of issues throughout the Civil War of trying to get enough supplies from one side to another. Lincoln didn't have this problem. He was in charge of the entire federal military and he just ship them back and forth where he wants to. All right, so let's talk about these numbers here a little bit and some different concepts that I'll reference back during the Civil War. Union troops, these are the amount of casualties. I mean, you're at millions here, all right? Total troops, you have 1.5 million, over a million here, the amount that are wounded, the ones that died of diseases, the ones that died of their wounds. Now, I want to point out here something that's really interesting about this number, 624,000. See how these are very exact numbers, and these are really rounded numbers. So there's a concept here that's going to explain a couple things here. So the North calls it a civil war because Lincoln refuses to acknowledge that the Confederate States of America is their own country. Refuses to acknowledge it. Just like, no, you're not. So the North, the United States of America, claims it's a civil war where it's America fighting America. The South is like, this ain't no civil war, because what's a civil war? Is when a country fights itself. The Confederate States of America is like, nah, this is absolutely not a civil war, because we aren't fighting ourselves. The Confederate States of America is fighting the United States of America. So there's an entire different name that the South uses for the Civil War than the Civil War. The term the South uses is the War of Northern Aggression. That is what the South refers to the Civil War, because they're saying the North is coming to attack us. The South isn't trying to go attack the North, and we're going to talk about more about that in the future, about what their strategies are. The South calls it the War of Northern Aggression. Like, we just want to be left alone. Like, this is not a civil war. Well, the United States of America says it is. The reason Abraham Lincoln aggressively refuses to acknowledge the South as his own country is he, as the president, has the right to do whatever he needs to keep America together. He says, that is my job as president, keep America together. If he acknowledges that they are a separate country, he then has to get permission from Congress to declare war on another country. So just by refusing to acknowledge that they are a separate country, he basically can be like a dictator in this war, which is going to be important because Congress probably would not have accepted this idea that he could just keep going with this war, because the war is going to get unpopular. So that brings us back to this number of why these are nice, neat little round numbers. These are guesstimates. So during the Civil War, when somebody dies, the United States government keeps very good numbers of who's wounded, who dies, and all that. All right. The Confederate States of America, with no federal government, really didn't keep track of it. After the Civil War is over, there is a decision that is made, mainly because Abraham Lincoln never acknowledged that the Confederate States of America was a legit country. All right. So technically, all of these people that died were also Americans. So they need to be added into the exact results in the history of the United States military of who died in combat. Trying to find out how many people died in the South was very difficult to do because the South didn't keep good numbers. So that's why these are nice, neat, round numbers added to exact numbers of the United States. And that's why we get real round numbers for the amount of people who died in the Civil War, because the South didn't keep exact numbers. So they get rounded off a little bit. So after the war, they acknowledge they say, yeah, these were all Americans, in a civil war. Whereas during the Civil War, the South is like, nah, we're our own country. Here's how different the two sides are. Everybody had their own separate name for every battle that took place. All right. It is absolutely ridiculous. So you got like the Confederate would call something First Manassas, and the federal name would call Bull Run. All right. Basically, this is the name of a battle that the United States of America used. This is the name of the battle that the Confederacy used. So when a battle takes place and after it's over, like, all right, what do we call that? They had different names. So the Battle of Manassas is the same as the Battle of Bull Run. So which one do we use in history? Spoiler alert, the United States of America is going to win the Civil War. So in history books, we use the terms that the United States of America uses. So these are the battle names that we use. I took a class on the Civil War in college, and the professor in college, it was the class of the Civil War from the South's perspective. Man, and it's pretty crazy. But using all the Confederate names of stuff that you think is pretty difficult. But all the names that we'll use for all the battles in this course will be the battles that were the names of the battles that the United States government used. There was no communication. Like it was as firm of a breakup as you can have from the South's perspective. And the North was like, we didn't break up. And the South was like, yeah, we did. And the North's like, nah, we didn't. And we're going to fight to get you back. Like literally fight to get you back. It is a unique situation. And it is going to turn into to be an absolutely bloody, horrific, awful way of doing things. All right, that's as far as we're going to get today. We're going to start getting into more battles and strategy and things tomorrow. But the stuff we talked about today is pivotal to understanding the baselines of the concepts that are going to take place in the Civil War, because we're going to reference them all the time. All right, see you guys tomorrow.